I should have seen it in their eyes when I walked in. The pity, the judgment, the disappointment. My own family, the people who were supposed to believe in me the most, sitting around that mahogany table like a tribunal ready to deliver a verdict on my life choices. But nothing prepared me for the moment my Uncle Raymond stood up, wineglass in hand, and announced to everyone that I was the family charity case. He actually used those words. The silence that followed was deafening, until my phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa, my assistant. "I'm outside with the documents. Should I come in?" Perfect timing has always been her superpower. When she walked through that dining room door with that leather portfolio containing the $40 million acquisition offer for my company, the look on their faces made every struggle of the past 5 years absolutely worth it. The memory of that perfect moment still brings a smile to my face whenever I recall it. The shocked expressions around the table as Vanessa confidently strode into my family's dining room, the elegant portfolio tucked under her arm containing paperwork that validated everything I'd been fighting for. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand the sweetness of that victory, you need to know how it all began. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra. Special for you. 3 years earlier, I was Elena Mitchell, a woman who thought she knew exactly where her life was headed. I had spent nearly a decade building my career at Vertex Solutions, one of the country's leading sustainable architecture firms. My husband, Nathan, was the firm's golden boy, the brilliant design mind whose eco-friendly skyscraper concepts had put Vertex on the map and made him the darling of the industry. We were the power couple everyone envied, me handling the business development that brought in the clients, him creating the revolutionary designs that kept them coming back. At least that's what everyone thought. Behind the scenes, the truth was quite different. While Nathan collected the accolades and industry awards, I was the one working until midnight, refining his rough sketches into viable structures, calculating load-bearing requirements, and ensuring his fantastical visions wouldn't collapse in the real world. "We're a team," he would say, kissing my forehead when I pointed out that my name never appeared in the credits. "Your contribution is implicit in mine. Everyone knows we're a package deal." I believed him because I wanted to, because admitting the alternative, that I was allowing my own talents to be systematically erased, was too painful to acknowledge. My family had never been particularly supportive of my architectural ambitions anyway. "Such a masculine field," my mother would sigh. "Couldn't you have chosen something more suitable?" When I brought Nathan home to meet them for the first time, their relief was palpable. He was charming, ambitious, and most importantly to them, he was the face of our partnership, the one whose name would go on buildings, while I remained safely in the background. The cracks in our marriage began appearing gradually, like hairline fractures in a foundation that seem insignificant until the entire structure is suddenly compromised. The first warning sign came during the Collins Tower project, a 50-story sustainable complex that would be Vertex's most ambitious undertaking yet. Nathan had been pulling away, spending late nights at the office and weekends at client meetings that never seemed to have any documentation. I was in our home office one evening, finalizing the structural plans for the tower's innovative wind turbine integration, a feature Nathan had conceptualized but left entirely to me to make functional, when I noticed his laptop was open on the desk. A notification flashed on the screen, an email from Isabel Winters, the new head of the Urban Development Committee. "Last night was incredible. Can't wait for Tokyo next week. Elena still doesn't suspect anything." My blood turned to ice as I read those words. Tokyo, the Sustainable Architecture Conference we'd been invited to as a couple. The conference Nathan had convinced me to skip just days ago, claiming the invitation had been reduced to just one attendee due to budget constraints. I scrolled through the email chain with shaking hands, uncovering months of exchanges, each more intimate than the last. But what truly drove the knife in wasn't the evidence of the affair. It was discovering that Isabel was helping Nathan pitch a new design concept to rival firms, using my technical solutions, but with his name alone on the patents. The confrontation that followed wasn't the dramatic, plate-throwing scene from a movie. Instead, it was something far more devastating. Cold, calculated admissions that revealed how thoroughly I'd been deceived. Isabel's family owns half the development properties in this city, Nathan explained with a calm that chilled me to the bone. Her connections open doors that Vertex can't. We're planning to launch our own firm, one that will make Vertex obsolete. We're planning. 2 words that confirmed what I'd already known in my heart. I was being left behind. Not just romantically, but professionally as well. The years of work, the innovations I'd created in his name, the clients I'd cultivated, all of it would go with him to this new venture, with Isabel's family money financing their success. And what about me? I asked, my voice sounding distant, to my own ears. Nathan had the audacity to look surprised. You'll be fine, Elena. You've always been more of a behind-the-scenes person anyway. That non-compete clause you signed with Vertex still has 4 years on it, but I'm sure they'll keep you on. Maybe not at your current salary, once I'm gone, but you're competent. Competent. After a decade of breathing life into his visions, of solving the impossible engineering challenges that made his fantastical designs actually buildable, I was competent. The word hung in the air between us, revealing more about how he valued me than any shouting match could have. The divorce proceedings moved with brutal efficiency. Nathan had clearly been planning his exit strategy for months, consulting with attorneys who found every possible clause to minimize his obligations. The prenuptial agreement I'd signed in a haze of romantic optimism suddenly revealed hidden barbs. The apartment we shared was in his name alone, a tax strategy he'd explained. Years ago that now left me essentially homeless. The innovative sustainable design methods I'd developed had all been patented under his name, or assigned directly to Vertex, meaning I couldn't even take my own work with me. Mr. Mitchell is prepared to offer 6 months of support, his lawyer explained across a polished conference table, not even attempting to hide her disdain for my tear-stained face. Given the circumstances, that's quite generous. The circumstances being that I made his career possible? I replied, finding a spark of anger among the grief. The lawyer simply smiled. The circumstances being that you have no documentation, proving any of those contributions. Professionally, you're just his wife, or you were, and professionally, that counts for nothing. She was right, of course. I had been systematically erased from my own accomplishments, left with nothing but a rapidly depleting bank account and a career in shambles. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 weeks after that meeting, I received the final blow. Vertex Solutions had terminated my employment, citing company restructuring as the cause. The real reason became clear when I saw the press release announcing Nathan and Isabel's new firm, Ascendant Architecture, and the list of clients they'd taken with them, all accounts I'd personally developed for Vertex. With my non-compete agreement still in effect, no major firm would touch me. The industry whispers had already begun, that I'd ridden Nathan's coattails, that I was the bitter ex being cut loose, that I had never been the real talent in our partnership. My own family, never particularly supportive of my career choice, made their position painfully clear during a Sunday dinner I'd been reluctant to attend. "Well, what did you expect?" my father asked, not bothering to lower his voice as he cut into his roast beef. "Architecture is a man's field. You should have listened when we suggested interior design instead." "Nathan always seemed too good to be true," my sister Julia added with fake sympathy that didn't mask her underlying satisfaction at my downfall. She had followed our parents' prescribed path, marrying a successful doctor, having 2 perfect children, and dedicating herself to charity luncheons and PTA meetings. My ambitious career had always been a point of contention between us. "The important thing now," my mother interjected, "is that you're still young enough to start over. Julia's friend Charlotte runs that lovely little home decor boutique. I'm sure she could use someone with your aesthetic sense." I looked around the table at these people who shared my blood but had never shared my dreams. They had never believed I could succeed in architecture, and now they were using my apparent failure as confirmation of their narrow worldview. The worst part was that a small voice inside me had begun to wonder if they were right, if I had been deluding myself all along. That night, in the spare bedroom of my parents' house where I was temporarily staying, I reached the lowest point of my life. Everything I had built over the past decade had been stripped away. My marriage, my career, my home, my professional reputation, all gone. I sat on the edge of the twin bed I'd slept in as a teenager, surrounded by my old trophies and ribbons, and felt the crushing weight of failure pressing down on me. It was then that I noticed my old sketchbook stacked neatly on the bookshelf, preserved by my mother despite her disapproval of my career choice. I pulled one down, flipping through page after page of designs I'd created before I'd even met Nathan. Innovative structures that challenged conventional wisdom. Sustainable solutions I'd conceived before they became industry buzzwords. Raw, unfiltered creativity that hadn't yet been shaped or constrained by anyone else's vision. Something shifted in me as I turned those pages. A realization that everything Nathan had taken from me, the clients, the patents, the professional connections, had never been the source of my talent. The core of my abilities hadn't been lost in the divorce settlement. It was still right here, in my hands and in my mind. I stayed up until dawn, filling a new sketchbook with ideas that had been suppressed for years under Nathan's shadow. Concepts for modular, sustainable housing that could be rapidly deployed in disaster areas. Designs for urban green spaces that integrated living architecture with community needs. By the time morning light filtered through the curtains, I had the beginnings of something that excited me more than any project I'd worked on at Vertex. What I didn't have was a way to make it real. The non-compete agreement still hung around my neck like a millstone, preventing me from working for any established architecture firm in the country. I had no capital, a rapidly diminishing savings account, and a professional reputation in tatters. But for the first time since Nathan had shattered my world, I had something equally powerful, a clear vision and the desperate determination to bring it to life. The answer came from an unexpected quarter. During my last week at Vertex, I had mentored a talented young intern named Vanessa Chen. Unlike Nathan and most of the senior architects, I had always taken time to nurture promising talent regardless of their pedigree or connections. Vanessa had been particularly brilliant, a scholarship student with a keen eye for both design aesthetics and practical engineering solutions. She had reached out after my dismissal, one of the few people from my professional life who bothered to check if I was okay. "Meet me for coffee," I texted her on impulse. "I have an idea I want to run by you." Vanessa arrived at the cafe with the efficient punctuality that had made her such a stellar intern. She looked different outside the office setting, more confident in casual clothes than in the two formal suits she'd worn while trying to be taken seriously at Vertex. "They're imploding without you," she said by way of greeting. "The Collins Tower project is 6 weeks behind schedule because nobody can figure out how to make Nathan's turbine design actually work." I couldn't help the small, satisfied smile. That crossed my face. That's because the design in the official plans isn't complete. I was still finalizing the calculations when everything happened. Vanessa nodded knowingly. "Everyone with actual technical knowledge understood you were the one solving the impossible problems. Nathan just stood in front while you made magic happen behind the scenes." Her validation of what I had privately known for years was unexpectedly emotional. I blinked back tears as I pulled out my sketchbook and slid it across the table. What do you think of this? Vanessa studied the pages with increasing interest, her expression shifting from polite curiosity to genuine excitement. This modular disaster relief housing, it's brilliant. The way you've integrated solar collection into the basic structure instead of as an afterthought, and these community spaces that can flex between medical facilities and schools. She looked up at me, eyes wide. Elena, this isn't just good architecture, this could change lives. That's the point, I said, feeling a surge of confidence. But I can't do anything with it. Not with this non-compete hanging over me. Vanessa closed the sketchbook thoughtfully. The non-compete prevents you from working for another architecture firm. But what if you weren't creating buildings exactly? What if you were creating sustainable housing systems? That's manufacturing, not architecture. A technicality, I said, though a glimmer of hope had sparked to life. The best kind, Vanessa replied with a grin. And here's another technicality. I never signed a non-compete with Vertex. I was just an intern, and I quit this morning. You what? I stared at her in disbelief. She shrugged. After seeing how they treated you, I knew it wasn't a place I wanted to build a career. So, what do you say? Want to start something new together? The offer was tempting, but reality crashed back quickly. With what money? These systems would require prototyping, testing, manufacturing partnerships. Have you heard of Miranda Kapoor? Vanessa interrupted. Of course I had. Miranda Kapoor was a legend in the tech world, one of the few female venture capitalists who had broken through the glass ceiling and now ran one of the most successful impact investment funds in the country. She gave a guest lecture at my university last year, Vanessa continued. She specifically mentioned wanting to find solutions for rapid, sustainable housing deployment after natural disasters. I still have her business card. Vanessa, investors. Like Miranda Kapoor don't take meetings with nobodies like us, I said gently. They take meetings with people who have revolutionary ideas and the technical skills to execute them, Vanessa countered. You have both. All we need is a solid business plan to get our foot in the door. That night, fueled by equal parts desperation and newfound hope, I began drafting what would become the founding document of Mitchell Sustainable Systems. Not an architecture firm, but a company that would design, develop, and license modular housing systems that could be deployed anywhere in the world. The wording was carefully crafted to navigate around my non-compete clause while still utilizing my core skills. Over the next 3 weeks, Vanessa and I worked relentlessly to develop a comprehensive business plan and prototype designs. I withdrew the last of my savings to rent a tiny office space, really just a room above a local print shop, where we could work without my family's constant commentary about my unrealistic dreams. Vanessa, meanwhile, leveraged her university connections to secure computer modeling software and access to engineering labs where we could test material strength simulations. The email from Miranda Kapoor's office came on a Tuesday morning when I was seriously considering giving up. Ms. Kapoor has reviewed your preliminary materials and would like to schedule a 30-minute meeting to discuss your concept further. 30 minutes. Half an hour to pitch the idea that could either resurrect my career or become the final nail in its coffin. Vanessa and I prepared obsessively, rehearsing our presentation until we could deliver it in our sleep, anticipating every possible question or objection. Miranda Kapoor's office was everything I expected: sleek, modern, and intimidating. The woman herself was smaller than she appeared in media photos, but radiated an energy that filled the room. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. Your disaster response housing system is intriguing, she said, gesturing to our prototype renderings displayed on her tablet. But Vertex Solutions presented something similar last quarter. How is this different? My heart sank. Of course, Nathan would have pillaged my personal research for his new venture. But then I noticed something in the images she turned to show us. A fundamental flaw in the structural support system. A flaw that would make the entire design fail under actual conditions. That system won't work, I said without thinking. The load distribution is completely unbalanced. In any wind over 40 mph, the whole structure would collapse. Miranda raised an eyebrow. You seem very certain. I am certain, I replied, finding my confidence. Because that's my original design concept, but it's missing critical elements. I never documented it, Vertex. What you're looking at is like having blueprint for a bridge with the support cables omitted. A long, tense silence followed as Miranda studied me with new interest. You're Nathan Mitchell's ex-wife. I'm Elena Mitchell, I corrected firmly. And yes, Nathan and I worked together at Vertex before he left to start his own firm. But these designs, I pointed to our presentation, these are entirely new. Developed after our separation and fundamentally different from anything at Vertex. Interesting. Miranda swiped through our presentation again, this time more slowly. This connecting system between modules, very innovative. Who developed this? I did, Vanessa spoke up. But it was based on Elena's core concept of flexible infrastructure hubs. For the next 20 minutes, Miranda grilled us on every technical aspect of our design. The questions were ruthlessly specific, requiring deep engineering knowledge to answer. Knowledge that went far beyond aesthetic design considerations. By the time our half hour was up, I felt physically exhausted but cautiously optimistic. Your technical solutions are sound, Miranda finally said. Better than sound, they're elegant. But you're still high-risk investments. No track record as independent operators. A potential legal challenge from Vertex despite your careful non-compete. Navigation and a manufacturing concept that would require significant capital to prototype. My hopes began to deflate until she continued. Fortunately, I specialize in high-risk, high-reward investments, particularly when they have the potential for substantial social impact. She slid a document across the table. This is a preliminary term sheet for seed funding. $1 million to develop working prototypes and secure manufacturing partners, in exchange for 30% equity and a seat on your board of directors. I stared at the paper, unable to fully process what was happening. $1 million. Enough to give Mitchell Sustainable Systems a real chance at success, but also a significant stake in a company that barely existed beyond sketches and dreams. We need to review this with legal counsel, Vanessa said smoothly, covering for my stunned silence. Miranda nodded approvingly. Smart? You have 48 hours to accept or propose reasonable amendments. I'm leaving for Tokyo on Friday, and I'd like this resolved before then. As we left her office, clutching the term sheet like it might dissolve if we loosened our grip, Vanessa turned to me with wide eyes. Tokyo, the architecture conference. The same conference Nathan and Isabel would be attending. The connection wasn't lost on me. Do you think she knows? About Nathan and Isabel? Probably. Miranda Kapoor knows everything about the industries she invests in. Vanessa hesitated. Does it matter? This funding could make us real contenders, Elena. She was right. Whatever Miranda's motivations, whether she genuinely believed in our concept or simply enjoyed backing the underdog in an industry drama, the opportunity was real. After consulting with a lawyer friend who specialized in startup funding, we signed the term sheet with minor amendments to the vesting schedule. 2 days later, the first installment of capital hit our newly established business account. And just like that, Mitchell Sustainable Systems was real. The transition from concept to actual company happened with breathtaking speed. We moved from our tiny room above the print shop to proper offices in an up-and-coming technology center. We hired 3 brilliant engineering graduates who had been overlooked by larger firms due to their unconventional backgrounds. We contracted with a material science lab to develop prototypes of our connective systems. For the first time in my professional life, my name was at the forefront, on company documents, on patent applications, on the door to our offices. I was no longer the invisible force behind someone else's success. The sensation was both exhilarating and terrifying. Without Nathan's name and reputation to hide behind, every success and failure would be unambiguously mine. The first 6 months were a grueling test of everything I thought I knew about myself. 18-hour workdays became normal. I slept on a cot in my office more often than in my newly rented apartment. Every prototype failure, and there were many, felt like personal validation of my family's lack of faith and Nathan's dismissal of my abilities. But with each setback came new understanding, refined approaches, and eventually, breakthroughs. Our first functional prototype was completed just as our initial funding was running dangerously low. Miranda arranged a demonstration for potential manufacturing partners and additional investors, a high-stakes presentation where everything would either come together or fall apart spectacularly. The night before, as we made final adjustments to the modular housing unit constructed in a warehouse at the edge of the city, Vanessa found me staring at the structure with undisguised anxiety. "What if it fails?" I whispered, giving voice to my deepest fear. "What if Nathan was right all along? What if I'm just competent?" Vanessa followed my gaze to our creation, a compact but remarkably spacious living unit that could be transported, flat and assembled in under 4 hours, complete with integrated solar power, water filtration, and structural elements that could connect to identical units to form community complexes. "Competent people don't create revolutionary designs," she said firmly. "Competent people don't secure million-dollar seed funding from Miranda Kapoor. Competent people don't inspire a team to work around the clock because they believe in a vision." She placed a hand on my shoulder. "Nathan called you competent because acknowledging your brilliance would have forced him to confront his own mediocrity." Her words steadied me, offering perspective I desperately needed. This wasn't just about proving Nathan wrong. It was about finally proving myself right. About creating something meaningful that could genuinely improve lives rather than just winning architectural awards. The demonstration the next day exceeded even our most optimistic projections. The manufacturing partners were impressed by the elegant simplicity of our connection systems. The humanitarian organization representatives immediately grasped the implications for disaster response. And the additional investors Miranda had invited recognized the commercial potential beyond emergency housing. In remote workforce accommodations, rapidly deployable medical facilities, and ecotourism. By the end of the day, we had commitments for a $5 million Series A funding round and preliminary manufacturing agreements with 2 different partners. Miranda pulled me aside as the last guests were leaving. "You've surpassed my expectations," she said without preamble. "Most first-time founders talk bigger than they can deliver. You've done the opposite." "Thank you for taking a chance on us," I replied, still somewhat dazed by the day's success. "It wasn't charity," Miranda said sharply. "I don't make investment decisions based on sympathy. I invested because I recognized something in you that reminded me of myself 20 years ago." She paused. "Did you know your ex-husband approached me for funding right after he left Vertex?" The revelation hit like a physical blow. No. His designs were flashy but fundamentally flawed. When my technical team pointed out the engineering problems, he couldn't address them. Kept insisting that details like that could be worked out later. She smiled thinly. "I don't invest in people who think structural integrity is a detail." The knowledge that Nathan had failed where I was now succeeding shouldn't have mattered. It shouldn't have sent a warm rush of vindication through my veins. But I'm only human, and the symmetry felt like cosmic justice. Over the next 2 years, Mitchell's sustainable systems grew beyond my most ambitious early visions. Our modular housing units were deployed in 3 major disaster response situations, providing safe, dignified shelter for thousands of displaced people. Our commercial applications expanded into workforce housing for remote construction and conservation projects. we opened a second office in Singapore to handle our growing international operations. Throughout this period of intense growth and visibility, I had minimal contact with my family. The occasional obligatory holiday phone call or text message exchange provided little opportunity for them to witness my professional resurgence. My parents, never particularly interested in my career beyond how it affected my marriage prospects, asked superficial questions about that little housing business without really listening to the answers. My sister Julia remained coolly distant, her initial satisfaction at my downfall gradually shifting to confusion as occasional news mentions of Mitchell Sustainable Systems crossed her social feeds. But neither she nor my parents ever directly acknowledged that the company making waves in sustainable housing bore my name. It was as if they couldn't reconcile the family disappointment narrative they'd constructed with the growing evidence of my success. The invitation to my Uncle Raymond's 70th birthday celebration arrived unexpectedly. A formal card with gold embossing requested the pleasure of my company at a dinner party to be held at his expansive estate. Uncle Raymond, my father's older brother, had always been the family patriarch, wealthy, opinionated, and brutally direct in his assessments of everyone's life choices. His disapproval of my divorce and subsequent career upheaval had been particularly cutting. My first instinct was to decline. The thought of subjecting myself to an evening of thinly veiled criticism and patronizing concern held no appeal. But as I was about to send my regrets, news arrived that would dramatically change the dynamic. Ascendant Architecture, Nathan and Isabel's firm, was being acquired by a major international conglomerate for a headline-grabbing sum. The announcement was everywhere in industry publications, with Nathan's smug face gracing the cover of Architectural Digest, alongside quotes about his visionary approach to sustainable design. The acquisition would make Nathan and Isabel obscenely wealthy and cement their status as industry stars. The timing couldn't have been worse. Just when my own company was gaining legitimate recognition, Nathan would once again overshadow my achievements with his more publicity-friendly success story. I knew without doubt that this news would be the talk of Uncle Raymond's birthday dinner, held up as further proof that I had made a catastrophic mistake in failing to support my husband's brilliance. That might have been the end of it. Another family gathering skipped to protect my hard-won peace of mind, if not for an unexpected development the very next day. A confidential email arrived from one of the largest humanitarian foundations in the world, expressing interest in acquiring Mitchell Sustainable Systems for $40 million. The foundation wanted to scale our disaster response housing globally, while maintaining our commercial applications as a revenue stream to support nonprofit deployments. The offer was stunning in its generosity and aligned perfectly with my vision for greater impact. After 3 days of intense negotiations with the Foundation's representatives and consultations with our board, we reached an agreement in principle. The final contracts would be ready for signatures within the week, coincidentally the same day as Uncle Raymond's birthday celebration. Something shifted in me as I considered the timing. After years of dismissal and doubt from my family, after being called everything from unrealistic to incompetent to worthless, I suddenly had tangible, undeniable proof of my value. Not just professional validation, but a specific dollar amount that even Uncle Raymond, with his real estate fortune, would have to respect. I RSVP'd to the party. As the day approached, I formulated a plan. Vanessa would accompany me to the event, but would wait in the car initially with the acquisition documents. The final version had been expedited and would be ready just hours before the dinner. At a strategic moment, I would text her to bring in the portfolio, creating a business emergency that would require my immediate attention. The timing would need to be perfect, ideally just after some particularly cutting remark about my failed marriage or struggling career. "Are you sure about this?" Vanessa asked as we sat in my car outside Uncle Raymond's estate, the leather portfolio containing the $40 million acquisition agreement on her lap. "You have nothing to prove to these people." I stared at the imposing house with its manicured gardens and circular driveway filled with luxury vehicles. I know, I said, though part of me wondered if I truly believed it. But after years of being the family cautionary tale, I want just one moment where they have to confront how wrong they've been. Your success already proves that, Vanessa said gently. This feels, I don't know, like you're still giving them power over how you feel about yourself. Her observation was uncomfortably perceptive. Was I still seeking validation from the very people who had consistently undervalued me? Or was this about finally closing a chapter that had been left painfully open? Maybe, I admitted. But I'm tired of them rewriting history to fit their narrow expectations. Just once, I want them to see me clearly. Not as Nathan's ex-wife or the family disappointment, but as someone who built something valuable entirely on her own terms. Vanessa nodded, understanding if not entirely approving. Text me when it's time. I'll make an entrance they won't forget. Walking into Uncle Raymond's house felt like stepping back in time. The same imposing furniture, the same family photos prominently displayed, though notably missing any featuring me after my divorce. The same hushed atmosphere of wealth that prioritized appearance over comfort. My parents were already there. My mother fussing over Julia's children while my father and uncle discussed property values by the bar. Elena? My mother spotted me first, her expression shifting rapidly from surprise to a practiced social smile. We weren't sure you'd make it. Wouldn't miss Uncle Raymond's birthday, I replied, accepting her air kiss without quite making contact. You remember your cousin Philip and his wife Stephanie? She continued, ushering me toward a couple I vaguely recalled from the last family wedding I'd attended. Philip just made partner at his law firm. Congratulations, I offered politely. Thank you, Philip replied with the confident smile of someone who had followed the expected path and been duly rewarded. I heard you're doing some kind of housing project? Prefab units or something? And so it began. The subtle diminishment, the careful positioning of my company as a quirky little side project rather than the multi-million-dollar enterprise it had become. Throughout the cocktail hour, I fielded similar questions and comments, each designed to minimize my achievements while magnifying others. Julia tells me you have an office in Singapore now, my father mentioned over his second scotch. Isn't that terribly expensive for a startup? You should be careful about overextending. We're actually profitable as of last quarter, I replied mildly. The Singapore office has already secured partnerships throughout Southeast Asia. He nodded vaguely, clearly not registering the significance. Well, just be careful. Nathan's new company is being acquired, did you hear? Hundreds of millions, apparently. Always knew that boy had potential. By the time we moved to the dining room for the formal birthday dinner, I was already regretting my decision to attend. The constant references to Nathan's success, the patronizing concern about my little company, the pointed questions about my personal life, all of it wore away at my hard-won confidence. Uncle Raymond took his place at the head of the table, surveying his assembled family with the satisfaction of a man who believed himself the undisputed patriarch of a dynasty. The dinner progressed through multiple courses, each more elaborate than the last, accompanied by fine wines and increasingly uninhibited conversation. It was during the dessert course that Uncle Raymond decided to make his pronouncement. Standing with wineglass in hand, he began the expected birthday speech, thanking everyone for attending and reflecting on his 70 years. Family is everything, he declared, gesturing expansively around the table. Seeing all of you here, successful, established, continuing our family legacy, is the greatest gift I could receive. His gaze paused briefly on me. Of course, not every path is straightforward. Some of us face detours, setbacks, poor decisions that must be overcome. The table grew quiet, everyone suddenly very interested in their chocolate soufflés. Elena, he continued, focusing fully on me now, has always been our family's free spirit, going against convention, taking risks that don't always pay off. He raised his glass in my direction, his smile not reaching his eyes. But we support her anyway, because that's what family does. We carry our own, even when they struggle, even when they become, let's say, the family charity case. The words hung in the air, landing with devastating precision. Charity case. After everything I had built, everything I had overcome, that's how he still saw me, how all of them saw me. Not as a successful founder or innovative designer, but as the poor divorced relation whose questionable choices required family tolerance. My phone buzzed in my lap, a text from Vanessa asking if everything was okay, if she should come in yet. I hesitated, finger hovering over the response. This was the moment I had planned for, the perfect cue for Vanessa to make her dramatic entrance with the acquisition documents, the vindication I had imagined for weeks. But looking around the table at these people with their rigid expectations and narrow definitions of success, I suddenly wondered, why did their validation matter? Would a $40 million acquisition actually change how they saw me, or would they simply revise their narrative again, claim I got lucky, or that the foundation overpaid, or that it wasn't real success like Nathan's? My company was changing lives. We had provided shelter for thousands of disaster victims. We had created jobs for dozens of talented people overlooked by traditional firms. We had built something meaningful and impactful, all without the approval of these people who had never truly believed in me. I put my phone away without responding to Vanessa. "Thank you for that assessment, Uncle Raymond," I said, rising to my feet. All eyes turned to me in surprise. Confrontation was not the Mitchell family way. "But I think you've misunderstood something fundamental about my life." "Elena," my mother hissed in warning, "this isn't the time." "Actually, it's exactly the time," I replied calmly. "For years, I've allowed all of you to maintain a fiction about me, that I'm struggling, that leaving Nathan was my great mistake, that my company is some cute little project rather than the multi-million-dollar enterprise it has become." Stunned, silence greeted this assertion. I was interrupted by the sound of the dining room door opening. All heads turned as Vanessa stepped confidently into the room, leather portfolio in hand, her professional demeanor a stark contrast to the stuffy family dinner atmosphere. She had clearly grown tired of waiting in the car and decided to take matters into her own hands. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "Ms. Mitchell, the Foundation representatives are requesting your immediate attention on these documents. They've made some last-minute adjustments to the terms." You could have heard a pin drop in that dining room. My Uncle Raymond's face froze mid-sip of his expensive Cabernet. My mother's fork clattered against her dessert plate. My sister Julia's perfect smile faltered for the first time that evening. "Foundation representatives?" my father asked, his voice unnaturally high. I hadn't planned for Vanessa's entrance anymore. I'd decided against the dramatic reveal. But now that she was here, something shifted in me. Not a desire for revenge or validation, but simply a calm determination to finally be seen clearly by these people who had defined me by their limited expectations for so long. "Yes, Dad," I replied, keeping my voice level as I reached for the portfolio Vanessa held out. "The Global Resilience Foundation, they're acquiring Mitchell Sustainable Systems for $40 million. The paperwork just came through today." The silence that followed was absolute. My Uncle Raymond's wine glass remained suspended halfway to his mouth. My cousin Philip's wife Stephanie stared at me with undisguised shock. My sister Julia's carefully constructed expression of superiority crumbled visibly. 40 million? My father finally managed, the words emerging as if he were testing a foreign language. I opened the portfolio, revealing the acquisition. Agreement with its bold headline figure prominently displayed on the summary page. "It's a comprehensive deal." They want to scale our disaster response housing globally while maintaining our commercial division. I'll be staying on as Chief Innovation Officer for at least 3 years. Uncle Raymond finally found his voice. But that's impossible. You were just your little housing project. After Nathan left. After Nathan left? I finished for him. I built something more valuable than anything he ever created. Something that actually helps people rather than just winning design awards. I turned to Vanessa, who was watching the scene unfold with barely concealed satisfaction. I don't think these need immediate attention after all. We can review the adjustments in the morning. She nodded, understanding perfectly. Of course. I'll let the foundation know you'll respond tomorrow. Should I wait in the car? No need, I said, closing the portfolio. Actually, I think we're done here. I turned to my uncle. Happy birthday, Uncle Raymond. I'm sorry I can't stay for cake. As Vanessa and I walked toward the door, my mother hurried after us. Elena, wait. You can't just drop news like that and leave. We should celebrate. This is incredible. The sudden shift in her attitude, from thinly veiled disappointment to enthusiastic support, might have been amusing if it weren't so transparent. For years, she had minimized my accomplishments and emphasized my failures. Now, with irrefutable proof of my success literally in black and white, she wanted to claim it as a family victory. It is incredible, I agreed, pausing at the threshold. But it's not sudden. I've been building toward this for 3 years, years during which none of you bothered to actually learn what I was doing or acknowledge my progress. You were all too busy referencing Nathan's success to notice mine. My father joined my mother in the foyer, his expression caught between embarrassment and belated pride. Now, Elena, that's not entirely fair. We've always supported you. No, I interrupted gently. You tolerated me. There's a difference. And right now, I'd rather celebrate with people who believed in me before there was a dollar figure attached. As we stepped out into the cool evening air, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I'd proven my worth to my family, though their shocked faces would certainly make a satisfying memory, but because I realized their validation had ceased to matter to me. Somewhere in the process of building something meaningful, I had finally freed myself from the need for their approval. Vanessa waited until we were in the car before breaking into a wide grin. That was magnificent. I wish you could have seen their faces from my angle when I walked in with that portfolio. I laughed, a genuine sound that surprised even me. I didn't think you were coming in. I decided against the dramatic reveal. I got worried when you didn't text, she explained, buckling her seatbelt. And then I thought, why should you have to face them alone? You never make the rest of the team face difficult situations without backup. The simple loyalty of her act touched me deeply. Thank you. Not just for tonight, but for everything. None of this would have happened without you taking a chance on me when everyone else was writing me off. Don't sell yourself short, Vanessa replied as we pulled away from Uncle Raymond's estate. I recognized your brilliance, yes. But you're the one who did the impossible, who built something extraordinary from the ashes of what Nathan tried to destroy. We drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the lights of the city growing brighter as we approached downtown. The acquisition papers sat on the console between us, $40 million for a company that had existed only in sketches 3 years ago. Where to now? Vanessa asked. The office to celebrate with whoever's still working late? Your apartment? I considered the options, then had a better idea. The Collins Tower. Vanessa raised an eyebrow but didn't question the choice, smoothly changing lanes to head toward the downtown district where the now-completed Collins Tower stood as one of the city's newest architectural landmarks. The Collins Tower project, the very one I'd been working on when I discovered Nathan's betrayal, had finally been completed 6 months earlier. Despite the delays caused by Nathan's departure and the technical challenges of implementing his designs without my calculations, Vertex Solutions had eventually managed to finish the building, though rumors in the industry suggested it had gone significantly over budget. We pulled into a public viewing area that offered a perfect vantage point of the tower, its distinctive silhouette illuminated against the night sky. The unique turbine integration that was supposed to be its defining sustainable feature was notably absent, replaced by a more conventional wind energy system that lacked the elegance of the original concept. They couldn't make it work, could they? Vanessa observed, following my gaze to the modified upper section of the building. No, I confirmed. Nathan's turbine design was fundamentally flawed without the load distribution system I was developing. They had to compromise. Does it bother you, not getting credit for your work there? I considered the question carefully, studying the building that represented the end of my old life and the catalyst for my new one. Not anymore. Collins Tower belongs to a different chapter, one where I allowed my contributions to be invisible. Mitchell Sustainable Systems is built on visibility and authenticity. We sat in contemplative silence, looking at the tower that stood as a monument to my past while discussing plans for the future. The Global Resilience Foundation acquisition would allow us to expand our impact exponentially, bringing safe, sustainable housing to disaster zones around the world while continuing to innovate in commercial applications. Have you thought about what this means personally? Vanessa asked eventually. Financially, I mean. Even after taxes and dividing the proceeds among shareholders, your stake must be worth around 15 million, I supplied. The figure still seemed unreal, a fantasy number with too many zeros. More than enough to never worry about money again. Will you buy a mansion next door to your uncle? Vanessa teased. I laughed at the absurdity of the suggestion. Absolutely not, though I am considering a place by the lake. Something modern and sustainable, of course, with a dedicated design studio and enough space that my parents won't need to stay in the guest room when they inevitably decide I'm their favorite daughter again. The joke contained enough truth to make us both smile wryly. Family dynamics were complicated, and success had a way of revising historical narratives. I had no doubt that my parents and the rest of the family would soon construct a version of events where they had always believed in me, where my triumph was somehow connected to their influence. Will you let them? Vanessa asked perceptively. Rewrite history that way? I sighed, watching the lights of Collins Tower shimmer in the distance. I don't know. Part of me wants to hold them accountable for how they dismissed me. But another part recognizes that people can only meet you where they are, and my family genuinely couldn't see beyond their limited vision of success. Well, they certainly see you now, Vanessa observed. Indeed they did. My phone had been buzzing nonstop since we left Uncle Raymond's house, messages from my mother, my sister, and various cousins, all suddenly eager to hear more about my exciting news. I had silenced the notifications without reading them, unwilling to let their belated interest disrupt this moment of quiet victory. As we prepared to leave the viewpoint, a sleek black car pulled into the parking area, its distinctive profile immediately recognizable. The Aston Martin had featured in enough architectural magazines alongside its owner to be instantly identifiable. Is that? Vanessa began. Nathan, I confirmed, watching as he emerged from the driver's side, followed by a woman I recognized as Isabel Winters. They were dressed formally, likely coming from some industry celebration of their own acquisition deal. For a moment, I considered sinking down in my seat to avoid being seen. The old Elena might have done exactly that, hidden from a potentially awkward encounter, preserved the peace at the cost of her dignity. But I was no longer that woman. Wait here, I said to Vanessa, opening my door. Or actually, no. Bring the portfolio. Nathan spotted me as I approached, his expression cycling rapidly through surprise, confusion, and finally settling into his practiced charm. Elena, what a coincidence. Nathan, I acknowledged with a polite nod. Isabel, Congratulations. On your acquisition. It's been all over the industry news. Isabel's smile was cool and professional, her arm possessively linked through Nathan's. Thank you. We're quite pleased with the valuation. I'm sure you are, I replied pleasantly. 300 million is impressive for a firm your size. Nathan's smile tightened slightly. The figure I quoted was the one publicly reported, but rumors suggested the actual amount was somewhat lower. Yes, well, visionary design commands a premium in this market. So I've noticed, I agreed as Vanessa joined us, portfolio in hand. Nathan's gaze flicked to Vanessa, recognition dawning. Vanessa Chen, right? From Vertex? You were an intern in the sustainability division. I was, Vanessa confirmed with professional courtesy. Now I'm Chief Operations Officer at Mitchell Sustainable Systems. Nathan's expression shifted subtly, a flicker of something that might have been genuine surprise. Mitchell. Is that your company, Elena? The modular housing concept? The fact that he knew even that much about my work was unexpected. I had assumed he'd been too absorbed in his own trajectory to keep track of mine. Yes, I confirmed. We specialize in rapid deployment sustainable housing systems for disaster response and remote applications. I've heard good things, he said with what seemed like reluctant admiration. Your disaster response units in the Philippines received quite a bit of positive press. The acknowledgement, however minimal, from the man who had once dismissed me as merely competent sent a small, unwelcome flutter of validation through me. I immediately chastised myself for still caring about his opinion on any level. The Philippines deployment was just the beginning, I replied, motioning to Vanessa. Actually, we finalized some significant news today. Vanessa opened the portfolio, angling it so the acquisition agreement was visible in the glow of the nearby streetlight. Nathan leaned forward slightly, his eyes widening as he registered the figure on the page. 40 million? He read aloud, unable to mask his astonishment. The Global Resilience Foundation is acquiring you for $40 million? Yes, I confirmed simply. The paperwork came through today. They're planning to scale our systems globally. Isabel's grip on Nathan's arm visibly tightened. That's quite an exit for such a young company, she observed, her tone suggesting she was reevaluating me entirely. It's not an exit in the traditional sense, I corrected her. I'm staying on as Chief Innovation Officer. The foundation wants to preserve the vision and expertise that built the company. Nathan seemed genuinely at a loss for words, a rare occurrence for a man who had always had a smooth response for every situation. Congratulations, Elena. That's truly remarkable. Thank you, I replied, surprised to find I meant it. There was something unexpectedly healing about receiving genuine recognition from the person who had once tried to erase my contributions. An awkward silence descended, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the gentle hum of the night air. Nathan glanced up at Collins Tower, its distinctive profile silhouetted against the sky. They couldn't make the turbine integration work, he said finally, following my earlier gaze. Not the way I envisioned it. No, I agreed. The original design had fundamental flaws. He nodded slowly. Flaws that you were solving when everything happened. The admission that he recognized my technical contribution, that he understood what had been lost when he pushed me out, was as close to an apology as Nathan Mitchell was likely to ever offer. Water under the bridge, I said, finding that I genuinely meant it. We've all moved forward. As we prepared to part ways, Nathan hesitated, then asked, the disaster housing, the way you've designed the connective systems to distribute structural load, it's brilliant. Was that approach something you developed after Vertex, or? The question revealed more than he probably intended. He was wondering if the innovations that had made my company valuable had their roots in ideas I'd had during our marriage. ideas he might have benefited from if he hadn't discarded me so thoroughly. After, I said definitively, everything at Mitchell Sustainable Systems was developed after we separated. Clean slate. The relief that flickered across his face was unmistakable. The last thing his newly acquired firm needed was potential intellectual property complications. Good, he replied. That's good. He extended his hand formally. Again, congratulations, Elena. It seems we've both found our paths. I accepted the handshake briefly. Indeed we have. As Vanessa and I walked back to our car, I felt a strange sense of completion. The encounter with Nathan hadn't been filled with recriminations or dramatic revelations. There had been no cinematic moment of triumph or vindication. Instead, there had been something more valuable. A quiet acknowledgement of worth between professionals who had once been entangled in ways that obscured their individual contributions. Are you okay? Vanessa asked as we drove away. Surprisingly, yes, I replied, watching Collins Tower recede in the side mirror. I think I finally got the closure I didn't realize I still needed. The weeks following the acquisition announcement were a whirlwind of activity. The news spread rapidly through industry channels, transforming Mitchell Sustainable Systems from a promising startup to a recognized success story overnight. My inbox filled with congratulatory messages from former colleagues, inquiries from potential partners, and, most gratifyingly, notes from young architects and engineers inspired by our approach to sustainable design. My family's reaction was exactly as predicted. My mother called daily, her tone shifting from the cautious distance of our previous conversations to effusive pride. I always knew you had something special, she insisted, conveniently forgetting years of skepticism. Even when you were little, the way you built those elaborate structures with your blocks, I told your father, that girl has vision. My sister Julia invited me to lunch at an exclusive restaurant where she'd previously been reluctant to be seen with her struggling sibling. I need to pick your brain about investments, she explained, as if my business acumen had been obvious all along. Mark's thinking about some property developments, and clearly you have a knack for spotting opportunities. Uncle Raymond's response was perhaps the most dramatic transformation. The man who had called me the family charity case now mentioned me in his country club conversations, claiming credit for encouraging my entrepreneurial spirit. He even went so far as to suggest that his birthday dinner had been planned specifically to celebrate my success. A revision of history so bold it would have been offensive if it weren't so transparent. I maintained polite but firm boundaries. With all of them, neither rejecting their newfound support nor allowing them to rewrite our shared history entirely. I appreciate your enthusiasm now, I told my mother during one particularly revisionist conversation. But let's not pretend there weren't years when you thought I was making a terrible mistake. The acquisition process itself moved forward, with remarkable efficiency. The Global Resilience Foundation had clearly done their due diligence before approaching us, and their legal team worked collaboratively with ours to address any potential issues. Within 6 weeks of the initial agreement, the deal was officially closed. The first tranche of acquisition funds was transferred, and Mitchell Sustainable Systems became a subsidiary of one of the world's largest humanitarian organizations. My personal share, after taxes, investor returns, and setting aside funds for the team members who had made it all possible, came to just over $15 million. A life-changing sum that represented not just financial security, but vindication of a vision that had once existed only in sketches made during my lowest moments. What will you do first? Vanessa asked as we stood on the balcony of our office the day the funds cleared. Besides the lake house you mentioned, any wild splurges planned? Private island? Super yacht? I laughed at the suggestion. Nothing. So extravagant. Though I did make an anonymous donation to the women's shelter that helped one of our team members when she left her abusive relationship last year. $1 million should fund their housing program for quite a while. Vanessa's expression softened. Of course you did. Using success to create safety for others. That's perfectly you. There was one purchase I had made, though I hadn't told anyone yet. Not a status symbol or luxury indulgence, but something far more meaningful to me personally. I had acquired a small architectural preservation fund that specialized in maintaining historically significant buildings at risk of demolition. Buildings like the one where I had first discovered my passion for architecture, an old library with remarkable structural innovations that had been scheduled for demolition to make way for luxury condominiums. The fund would ensure that such spaces were preserved and repurposed rather than destroyed, maintaining their architectural integrity while adapting them for contemporary needs. It was my way of ensuring that invisible innovations, the kinds of technical brilliance that often went uncredited, would be recognized and protected. 3 months after the acquisition closed, I finally allowed myself a proper celebration. I had purchased a modernist home on the lakeshore, a steel and glass structure with impeccable sustainability credentials and enough space for both comfortable living and a dedicated design studio. Rather than filling it with expensive furniture and status symbols, I had worked with local artisans to create custom pieces that emphasized craftsmanship and sustainable materials. For the housewarming party, I invited only those who had genuinely supported my journey, the core team from Mitchell Sustainable Systems, key allies like Miranda Kapoor, and a few longtime friends who had stood by me during the difficult post-divorce period. Conspicuously absent were my family members, who had all angled for invitations with varying degrees of subtlety. "Aren't you worried about causing a family rift?" Vanessa asked as we prepared for the guests to arrive. "Your mother called 3 times yesterday alone." I arranged a centerpiece of locally grown flowers, considering the question. "They'll be upset, certainly, but I'm not excluding them out of spite or revenge. This celebration is about honoring the people who believed in the vision before it was validated by a price tag. My family can be part of other celebrations in the future once they've demonstrated they value me beyond my bank account." The party was everything I had hoped, filled with genuine conversation, spontaneous collaborations between creative minds, and a shared appreciation for the journey that had brought us all together. As evening fell, I found myself standing by the wall of windows overlooking the lake, watching the moonlight create a silver path across the water. Miranda Kapoor joined me, champagne glass in hand. "Quite a view," she observed. "Though I'm more impressed by the geothermal heating system and solar integration. You've created a virtually self-sufficient home here." "That was the goal," I acknowledged. "A living demonstration of the principles we've built the company on." She studied me with her characteristic directness. "And what principles will guide the next chapter? Now that you've proven yourself beyond anyone's doubts, what motivates Elena Mitchell going forward?" It was a profound question, one I had been contemplating during the quieter moments of the past few months. The acquisition had removed financial pressure as a motivator. The success of our projects had established professional credibility. The recognition from peers had satisfied the need for validation. What remained was perhaps the purest motivation of all. "Impact," I said finally. "Creating systems and spaces that genuinely improve lives, not just for those who can afford architectural innovation, but especially for those who need it most." Miranda nodded approvingly. "That's what I hoped you'd say. It's why the foundation was willing to pay a premium for Mitchell Sustainable Systems. We weren't just acquiring technology, we were investing in a vision and the person behind it." As the party continued around us, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 3 years earlier, I had stood in an empty apartment, surrounded by the ruins of a life I thought defined me. I had lost my marriage, my professional identity, and my sense of self-worth in one devastating sequence of betrayals. That night, I had allowed myself one evening of grief before beginning to rebuild, not knowing then that what I would create from those ruins would far exceed what had been destroyed. Not just a successful company or financial security, but a sense of purpose, entirely my own. A vision that helped others while honoring my authentic talents. The woman Nathan had discarded as merely competent had created something he couldn't have imagined. Not out of vengeance or competition, but because finally being free of his shadow had allowed me to discover capabilities I hadn't known I possessed. Later that evening, as the last guests were preparing to leave, Vanessa handed me an envelope. "This came by courier while you were showing Miranda the studio space. The delivery person insisted it was urgent." The envelope bore no return address, just my name in typed letters. Inside was a single sheet of expensive stationery with a handwritten note. "Elena, I saw the feature on your disaster relief housing in Bangladesh. The Foundation's decision to scale your system globally is the best news I've read all year. What you've created will save countless lives and provide dignity during unimaginable circumstances. This may mean little coming from me now, but I need to say it. You were never just competent. You were brilliant all along, and I knew it. My greatest professional mistake was not acknowledging that brilliance. My greatest personal failure was not appreciating the woman behind it. Wishing you continued success, Nathan?" I read the note twice, then carefully refolded it and returned it to the envelope. The acknowledgement that had once seemed so crucial now felt almost unnecessary. A postscript to a story that had already reached its resolution. "Anything important?" Vanessa asked, noticing my thoughtful expression. I slipped the envelope into a drawer, where it would likely remain untouched. "No," I said truthfully. "Just confirmation of something I already know." As I looked around my home, filled with evidence of a life rebuilt on my own terms, I felt a profound sense of completion. The $40 million acquisition wasn't the validation that mattered most. Neither was the belated recognition from family who had once dismissed me, nor the acknowledgement from the ex-husband who had once undervalued me. What mattered was the journey from invisible support to visible creator. From someone defined by relationships to someone defined by vision and impact. From competent to transformative. The true measure of my worth had never been a number on an acquisition agreement or the shocked expressions around a family dinner table. It was in the thousands of disaster survivors with safe, dignified shelter, the dozens of team members with meaningful employment, the sustainable systems that would continue improving lives long after today's particular triumph had faded from memory. I stepped onto my balcony overlooking the lake, breathing in the cool night air. The light from my home, created entirely on my terms, cast a warm glow on the water below. Behind me, the sounds of genuine friendship and shared purpose filled the spaces I had designed. The woman who had once been evaluated and found wanting by others had finally recognized her own worth. And that, more than any financial windfall or professional accolade, was the most valuable acquisition of all. 1 year after the Global Resilience Foundation acquisition, I found myself in a position I could never have imagined during those dark days following my divorce. Mitchell Sustainable Systems had expanded operations to 27 countries, with our housing units providing safe shelter for over 100,000 people displaced by natural disasters. The commercial division was thriving as well, with eco-tourism developments and remote workforce housing generating sustainable revenue that supported our humanitarian efforts. My role as Chief Innovation Officer gave me the freedom to focus on what I loved most, designing next-generation sustainable systems while leaving the day-to-day operations to the exceptional team we had built. Vanessa had been promoted to President of Global Operations, overseeing our expanding international presence with remarkable skill for someone still under 30. The lakeside home I had purchased with my acquisition proceeds had become not just a personal sanctuary, but a showcase for sustainable living. I had opened it twice for architecture tours focused on residential sustainability, with proceeds benefiting scholarships for women pursuing careers in STEM fields. The irony wasn't lost on me that my home, the physical manifestation of my success, was now inspiring others in ways my family had once failed to support. Speaking of family, our relationship had evolved into something I could live with, if not the unconditional support I might have once craved. My parents had eventually accepted that their revised narrative of always believing in me wasn't one I would validate, settling instead for a more honest acknowledgement of how their perspective had changed. My sister Julia had moved from transparent opportunism to something resembling genuine respect, particularly after her teenage daughter expressed interest in engineering, and I had become a welcome mentor. Uncle Raymond remained Uncle Raymond, unable to fully admit his misjudgment, but noticeably more careful in his pronouncements about others' life choices. The family charity case comment had entered family lore as the famous last words before. Elena became a multimillionaire, a story now told with nervous laughter at family gatherings I occasionally attended. The morning began like many others, with a video call connecting team members from around the world to discuss ongoing projects and emerging challenges. Today's focus was a new deployment in coastal regions vulnerable to rising sea levels, communities that needed housing solutions adaptable to increasingly unpredictable environmental conditions. The Foundation's Climate Science Division has updated their projections, explained our head of environmental research, sharing detailed maps on screen. We need to consider water level rises of up to 2 meters in these regions over the next 50 years. That changes our foundation requirements significantly, I noted, sketching rapidly on my tablet as I thought through the implications. We might need to consider an elevated modular approach, something that can be progressively raised as water levels increase. The team built on this concept, each member contributing expertise from their particular domain: structural engineering, materials science, community integration, cost analysis. This collaborative approach had become our hallmark, replacing the hierarchical design process I'd experienced at Vertex, where a single visionary, inevitably male, inevitably with the right connections, would receive credit for work developed by many. As the meeting concluded, my assistant Maya appeared in the doorway of my home office. Unlike Vanessa, who had been both colleague and friend from the beginning, Maya maintained a more traditional professional boundary, though I made sure she was well compensated and her contributions properly acknowledged. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, "but there's something you should see immediately." She held out a tablet displaying the business section of a major news site. The headline made my heart skip. "Ascendant Architecture Faces Bankruptcy Amid Safety Concerns." The accompanying photo showed Nathan and Isabel leaving a courthouse, their expressions grim. I scanned the article quickly, the key points jumping out in stark relief. Structural failures in 3 major projects. Lawsuits alleging negligence in engineering specifications. Acquisition deal rescinded following. Discovery of fundamental design flaws. Winter's family distancing themselves from mounting legal troubles. When did this break? I asked Maya, my voice steadier than I expected given the shock of seeing Nathan's fall so publicly documented. "About an hour ago," she replied. "It's spreading across all the industry publications now. Apparently, the issues stem from key structural elements that were improperly calculated. Buildings that looked innovative on paper, but couldn't withstand real-world conditions." The irony was almost too perfect. Nathan had built his career taking credit for my structural solutions, then discarded me for a woman with better connections. Without my engineering expertise to make his flashy designs actually work, the fundamental flaws in his approach had finally been exposed, not in a private conversation or industry whisper network, but in catastrophic failures that couldn't be charmed or networked away. "There's something else," Maya added, swiping to another article. "This just posted on Arch Daily 10 minutes ago." This headline was even more direct. "Ascendant bankruptcy filings reveal $1 million consulting fees to technical ghosts." The Bowie article detailed how bankruptcy proceedings had forced disclosure of Ascendant's financial records, revealing enormous payments to uncredited consultants who had quietly solved the technical problems in Nathan's earlier successful projects. After establishing his reputation with these technically sound buildings, he had apparently grown overconfident, reducing or eliminating the consulting fees for subsequent projects that were now literally falling apart. "Should I prepare a statement?" Maya asked. "Industry journalists are already calling for comment, given your history with Mr. Mitchell." I considered the question carefully. The vengeful part of me, the woman who had been called competent while her innovations were stolen, wanted to say something pointed about chickens coming home to roost. The businessman in me recognized an opportunity to position Mitchell's sustainable systems as the ethical alternative to firms that prioritized flash over substance. But the person I had become in the years since rebuilding my life recognized something. More important than either revenge or advantage, this wasn't my story anymore. No statement, I decided. This isn't about me or our company. The people affected by these structural failures deserve better than to have their situation used for someone else's vindication or marketing opportunity. Maya nodded, seeming to approve of the decision. "Very well. I'll let the PR team know we're declining comment." As she left, I turned back to the news articles, feeling a complex mix of emotions. There was no joy in seeing Nathan's downfall, despite the poetic justice of it. People had been put at risk by his cutting corners. Clients had lost millions trusting his firm's competence. Employees who had nothing to do with the technical failings would lose their jobs in the bankruptcy. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "Have you seen the news about Ascendant?" "Just now," I replied. "Crazy timing." Her response came quickly. "The universe delivers karma in interesting packages. How are you feeling about it?" I considered the question honestly. "Mostly neutral," I wrote back. "It doesn't change anything about my journey, though I admit there's a certain symmetry to it all." "Symmetry indeed," she responded. "The man who couldn't recognize your value now falls because he tried to replace it." Throughout the day, I received messages from others who knew my history with Nathan, colleagues from Vertex days, mutual acquaintances, even Miranda Kapoor, who simply texted, "I told you I don't invest in people who think structural integrity is a detail." By evening, the story had evolved further. Additional articles revealed that Isabel had filed for separation, her family's legal team working overtime to insulate their assets from Ascendant's implosion. Nathan's carefully constructed professional image was disintegrating as rapidly as his buildings, with former employees coming forward with stories of credited work and ignored safety concerns. As I prepared dinner in my lakeside kitchen, the floor-to-ceiling windows framing a spectacular sunset over the water, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in years, but instantly recognized. Nathan. My finger hovered over the decline button for a long moment before I made a different choice. Whatever he wanted. Explanation, absolution, help. I was secure enough in my own path to hear him out. "Hello, Nathan," I answered, keeping my tone neutral. "Elena." His voice sounded rough, strained in ways I'd never heard during our marriage. I didn't think you'd pick up." "I almost didn't," I acknowledged honestly. "What can I do for you?" A long pause followed, filled with the weight of everything that had transpired between us. "I'm sure you've seen the news," he finally said. "I have." "It's all falling apart," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "Everything I built. The firm, the reputation, the narrative," I finished for him, naming what had always mattered most to Nathan. The story people told about him, the image he projected to the world. "Yes," he admitted. "The narrative." Another pause. "I should have credited you, Elena. On the Collins Tower, on the West Side development, on everything we worked on together. Your structural solutions made my designs possible, and I took that for granted. The admission, so long in coming, delivered only after his alternatives had been exhausted, landed with surprising gentleness. 3 years ago, it would have meant everything. Today, it was simply confirmation of what I had already come to understand. My worth had never depended on his recognition. "Thank you for saying that," I replied sincerely. "But that's the past. Nathan, what matters now is how you handle this moment." "That's why I'm calling," he said, his voice strengthening slightly. "I need your advice, not your help. I know I have no right to ask for that. But your perspective. You rebuilt from nothing after what happened. How did you do it?" The question was so unexpected, so genuinely vulnerable, that it took me a moment to formulate a response. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I hadn't expected Nathan, who had always positioned himself as having all the answers, to actually ask. "I stopped trying to be what other people expected," I said finally. "I stopped measuring success by external validation and started building something that aligned with my authentic values. And most importantly, I surrounded myself with people who recognized my contributions rather than erased them." "I don't know if I can do that," he admitted. "Start over at my age, with this kind of public failure attached to my name." "You can," I assured him, surprised to find I genuinely wanted him to find a healthier path forward. Not for his sake, exactly, but because the world didn't need more cautionary tales. It needed people who had learned from their mistakes. "But it requires something you've always struggled with, Nathan. Humility. The willingness to be wrong, to learn, to give credit where it's due." Our conversation continued for almost an hour, not as former spouses rehashing old wounds, but as two professionals discussing the collapse of a career and the possibility of building something more authentic from the ruins. I found myself offering practical suggestions about how he might leverage his design skills within a more collaborative framework, one where he contributed his genuine talents without claiming expertise in areas where he needed support. When we finally said goodbye, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. Not because Nathan had finally acknowledged my contributions, but because I had been able to offer guidance without resentment. To see him not as the man who had shattered my world, but simply as another human being facing the consequences of his choices. The following morning, I woke to an email from the Global Resilience Foundation. Our coastal housing adaptation project had received full funding approval. $75 million to develop and deploy living architecture solutions for communities facing climate displacement. This would be our most ambitious undertaking yet, with the potential to help millions of people maintain their connection to ancestral lands, even as environmental conditions changed around them. As I stood on my deck watching the morning light play across the lake, I reflected on the parallel trajectories that had brought me to this moment. Nathan's path, prioritizing appearance over substance, credit over collaboration, flash over function, had led to spectacular success followed by equally spectacular collapse. My journey, though beginning in devastating setback, had created something of lasting value, something that would continue improving lives long after today's headlines had faded from memory. The family that had once called me worthless had been proven wrong not just by the $40 million acquisition, but by the impact of the work itself. The ex-husband who had dismissed me as merely competent was now seeking my advice on how to rebuild a career in ruins. The woman who had once defined herself through others' expectations now led a global effort to create sustainable futures for vulnerable communities. I turned away from the view and toward my home office, where the coastal adaptation plans awaited my attention. There was important work to be done, work that had nothing to do with proving my worth to family members who had failed to see it, to an ex-husband who had tried to claim it, or to a society that consistently undervalued it. The measure of my success was no longer the shock on their faces when my assistant walked in with that $40 million check. It was in the thousands of lives improved by the systems we created. The environmental innovations that would outlast any single building or career. The team of brilliant individuals whose contributions were properly credited and valued. That dinner where they called me worthless had not defined me. It had merely revealed how limited their vision had been all along. Their validation, when it finally came with dollar signs attached, was merely a footnote in a story that had always been about something far more valuable. The discovery of my own capacity to create meaningful change in a world that desperately needed it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.